Welcome to the Heart and Life Podcast, a podcast dedicated to encouraging, equipping, and edifying the people called Methodist in North Alabama and across the globe. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Heart and Life Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Rogers. On today's episode, we'll be talking with the Reverend Toby Chastain. Toby is currently serving as the senior pastor at Russellville First Methodist Church, as well as serving as the executive director of the Board of Ministry for the North Alabama Conference of the Global Methodist Church. I wanted to have Toby on the show for a couple of reasons. One, Toby has worn a lot of different hats in ministry over the years, and I wanted to find out more about his story and his current ministry setting. And two, I thought it might be helpful, especially those who may be wrestling with a call to ministry, to hear from our Board of Ministry's executive director. I'm excited for this conversation, so without further ado, Toby, welcome to the Heart and Life Podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here with us today and looking forward to a great conversation. We'll just jump right on in. How about that?
Perfect.
I'd like to start our conversation by giving you the opportunity to maybe talk a little bit about your life and ministry. Maybe you can tell our listeners a little about your faith journey, where it started, and some of the different roles that you have taken on over the years.
Perfect. Yeah. So, my call to ministry really kind of begins, depending on where I choose to start the conversation, either in high school with a pastor who invited me to go to a youth meeting in Opp, Alabama, that ended up having me be a delegate to annual conference. I was in the Alabama West Florida conference at the time, or a history of Methodism class that I took in college. The Lord was working through all of those instances, and I can go back and kind of point to places where the Lord was using me and nurturing the call, but I really answered my call in college at Huntingdon College in Montgomery, Alabama, during a history of Methodism class. I had grown up in a Christian household, and my dad is actually a Baptist, and my mother's a Presbyterian. But when we moved to a small town in South Alabama, we started going to the United Methodist Church, and that's where I found faith and found some nurturing Sunday school teachers and pastors that encouraged my faith. And so, like I said, when I chose a college, I ended up choosing a Methodist school, and went to Huntington, and I was there for 5 years. Actually, I took an extra year because I have a degree in accounting and Christian education. And so when I got my call to ministry, I left Huntington after 5 years with that degree in Christian education, and started my ministry career. And I started in youth ministry. And that was in 1999. Actually, I'd been working part-time at a church during college, and so I took my first full-time job, and I was, of course, a layperson in our nomenclature, but serving in ministry roles. So I felt very much in a pastoral role, even though I didn't have the title of clergy.
Yeah.
And so I spent some years in doing youth ministry and knowing that was my calling. And after 5 years in undergraduate, I wanted to take a break from school, and I had the degree I needed so I could just continue to serve.
Sure.
And so I served for a number of years, and somewhere around the early kind of 2010s, I became aware of the Center for Youth Ministry Training, and they were partnered with Memphis Theological Seminary. And an opportunity to get a degree, a master's degree, and have the requirements that I needed to be an ordained deacon within the United Methodist Church. So I kind of began to pursue that route, and I was ordained in the United Methodist Church as an ordained deacon, finished my Master of Arts in Youth Ministry. And I thought that youth ministry was going to be that I was basically going to stay in youth ministry until they ripped the dodgeball out of my dead hands. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. And around 2019, a long list of things kind of happened in my life that I won't even. We don't have enough time to go into that, but
Sure.
The Lord began to shift my call a little bit and begin to work with me, and so I found myself being appointed as the associate pastor at Decatur First United Methodist Church. Now, my my role there at that time was primarily over the discipleship, and I was supervising the children's ministry person, the youth ministry person, and the preschool person. We had a full-time preschool there. So I found myself kind of in a supportive role with the senior pastor, working in areas of discipleship and evangelism, and some other pastoral roles, and began to expand and actually began to find that I had some different gifts and maybe callings that I didn't realize when I was full-time in youth ministry. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that kind of changed the landscape for a lot of us. And one of the things that it did for me was that I was able to kind of spend some time reevaluating my call and praying and seeing what the Lord was doing with me. And of course, our denomination was having a lot of conversations, a lot of them online, about what was going on.
Right.
And it was about that time that the what would become the Global Methodist Church kind of released their preliminary requirements for ordained elder. And I looked at and saw that what I would need to kind of what I already had for deacon and what I would need to complete for elder, and it was not a lot of classes. And I said, maybe I need to look at picking these up. And about that same time, Wesley Biblical Seminary came online, and they were offering free seminary. And I said, I like free seminary.
Absolutely.
So I began taking classes at Wesley, and I was intentional to make sure I took the ones that would help me transition from an ordained deacon to an ordained elder. If, as in the middle of the pandemic, we were still unsure of what was going to happen in our denomination, but we had some possibilities, and I want to make sure I was kind of prepared for all possibilities. So if everything kind of happened as we might expect, that I could turn around and be able to make that transition. And like I said, I felt God kind of shifting a call in my life, and so began taking those classes. And in the midst of that, around 22, we were all making decisions about next steps, taking votes. I was serving at Decatur First United, as I said, and they took a vote, and they lost that vote by 8 votes. So we didn't reach the 60. Yeah, we didn't reach the 67% that was required. Another church in town, Central United Methodist, missed the vote by about 10 votes. About the same percentage. They had a few more voting members, and so they missed by about 3%, missing the threshold. So 2 congregations that were predominantly wanting to leave the United Methodist Church but could not. And so approximately 100 members from Decatur United, First United, and about 150 members from Central came together the second Sunday of Advent in 22 and formed a new church.
Wow.
Yep. They were meeting in what was then a Presbyterian church that was closed. They've since purchased that. So that group met in that December and began to start a new congregation. And in January, I was invited to come on board and be their executive pastor. They had a guy named Jack Lovelace, who Jack had been working, had some prior ministry experience, but at the time, still ministry experience, prior pastoral experience, I should say. But he was serving in a parachurch organization, and so he couldn't kind of take the job full time, but he was preaching on Sunday mornings, and he's a very gifted preacher and Bible teacher. But they kind of needed somebody to kind of do the day-to-day operations. They had never started a church before. They needed all of the logistical things that you do and all the day-to-day stuff. And so I was invited to come and be a part of that journey. And so in February of 23, I left the United Methodist Church. And at the time, this was an independent Methodist church. It started, but I had some conversations with our president pro tem, Alan Beasley, and some of the other leadership, and said, hey, this is where I feel like God's calling me. We're here. We can help it get started. They're trying to figure out who they are and how they want to go. And I was given the blessing of the cabinet to do that. And so I was, went there, So I spent 3 months. In that 3 months, they purchased that building, that Presbyterian building that I mentioned, and set up some other foundational documents. Began the process of establishing all their leadership, all the committees and teams it takes to run a church, and some of their structures. And we're growing. We would have well over 300 in worship every Sunday. Easter Sunday filled up the fellowship hall and the sanctuary with folks, growing really well.
Awesome.
It was a wonderful time. But one of the things I was pretty clear with them about was that the Global Methodist Church, I had kind of found my tribe. And I wanted to be part of what God was doing in the Global Methodist Church. That there were a lot of things I was not sure about, but the one thing I was definitely sure about was that I wanted to be a part of this new movement. And so, at the end of April, they took a church vote. They had kind of said we were going to wait a few months to take the vote, but they took a vote of affiliation, and they decided that at this time, that current time, that it was not right for them to affiliate. They want to stay independent.
Okay.
They may at some point come later, and we're praying that, I know, but right now they felt like that was the best for them. There was a lot of healing and hurt that had happened because of the denomination that we left, and there were some that just didn't feel like they wanted to jump back in the pool with the denomination, and so. But they're still Methodist and still doing great ministry. I still keep in touch with a lot of leaders there.
Awesome.
The next morning, actually that night really, but the next morning I got a formal call from some of the leadership of the conference, and they said, "Hey, we want you to go and meet with the Staff Parish Relations Committee at Russellville and talk with them and see if that's a good fit." And so I met with them. We had a conversation. I felt like that was where God was leading me, and they felt the same. And so they met with the leadership, the cabinet, and asked that I would be appointed here. And so beginning in June 1 of 23, I was appointed as the senior pastor at Russellville First Methodist. And so that's kind of my journey. I know that was probably a little more than you wanted, but it's been a crazy ride.
Sure. No, that's great. That's great. I love hearing how God is moving in people's lives, and it sounds to me like, Toby, that God just continued to open the doors at the right time when they needed to be open, and as much as that, it sounds like you were willing to say yes to where God was moving you all along the way, and that's what a testament to your faithfulness. So. Thank you for sharing that. So, what's going on at Russellville these days? How are things out there?
It's great at Russellville. I shouldn't tell people this because everybody's going to want my job. This is one of the best churches I've ever served. It's awesome. Great ministry. They're wonderful people. There's a really active Emmaus community here, which is awesome. Which means I've got a lot of great leaders.
Sure.
And they're really supportive of us. We are. They had a pastoral change in the middle of COVID, which is never great. And then right around the time of this affiliation, they had another pastoral change, and so it's just been kind of we spent the first year and a half just kind of getting to know one another and finding kind of some rebuilding and dreaming. We were actually able to have a campaign this past year and pay down about $250,000 worth of debt on a building, which is
awesome.
Exactly, which is huge.
Yes, it is.
So we were able to pay that down, and that's gave us some breathing room as far as financially. We're beginning to explore missions. So our church has we call it a why statement. It's similar to a mission statement. And it's to love and serve others, expecting nothing, so that the community we touch can be transformed by Christ. And so we really focus on that, to love and serve others, and that's become kind of a push for us. And so one of the things we're doing is we're working with some folks to begin an intentional mission. We do a ton of missions, but it's not in an organized or in a centralized fashion. So we're working with TMS Global to begin the process of kind of building a missional program. We're hoping to have a global impact celebration in next February of next year, and we're just continuing to reach out to our community. We're helping. We're actually beginning. I'm actually preaching on God and holiness. As we're as Global Methodists, we've embraced a new mission statement. Part of it is to spread scriptural holiness across the globe, and so we're going to spend a lot of time this spring talking about holiness and what it means to be holy and what it doesn't mean. In other words, some of the cultural brands we've put on it doesn't mean judgmental or hateful or legalistic.
Right. Oh yeah. We hear that a lot. That's awesome. Toby, I know that in the last several months, Russellville has been in the news a little bit and not always necessarily in the most positive light, but you guys have a real opportunity there, don't you, to reach out to some communities that are really, or some people groups that are really in need.
We do, and we one of the things we're trying to do is trying to be an oasis for people in the community. Trying to say, hey, we're here. We're wanting to love folks and reach out. And we've got it's an interesting thing. One of the most interesting things here is we have a large Hispanic Latino community here, and the largest church in the city is the Catholic Church, which was actually started in the basement of our church several decades ago.
Wow. How about that? That's cool.
They didn't have a space, and so our church was like, hey, you need space, you can begin to meet here. And every year during Holy Week, on the Tuesday of Holy Week, we actually have a cross that stands in our sanctuary the rest of the year, and it has prayers and confessions on it, and we take those off. And we on that Tuesday, we come and we nail new prayers and confessions on our cross, and they do the same in theirs. And then we walk between the two churches, and we meet halfway and pray for each other and sing with each other and exchange crosses. And then those crosses stay in our sanctuaries for the rest of the year for us to. So there's a really cool link we have with a community church, and we're doing some other things with other churches. So it's and I'm telling you, the folks here are great. They have a heart for Jesus. They want to serve others. They want to love others, and that's all you could ask for.
For sure, and I love that. I love the coming together. I love the swapping crosses. Man, that's what a powerful image of God's people coming together, even across some differences. That's amazing. That really cool thing. All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit. We've kind of already mentioned this, but in addition to serving in the local church, you also are serving as our conference executive director for our Board of Ministry. Now, for those who travel in our Methodist circles, that it may seem obvious what the Board of Ministry is all about, but for our listeners who maybe are not quite as familiar with our structure, can you talk a little bit about what the Board of Ministry is and what it does?
Yeah, I can, and I'll. This is helpful, I think, too, for our since we've kind of come out of some different things. One of the intentional things that we did with the Global Methodist Church is we don't have a board of ordained ministry. We just have a board of ministry, and the reason why is because we wanted to be intentional about that. It's ministry is not just something that ordained folks do, but it's for all, and so part of our purview becomes not just the ministry of those that are in the ordained circles, but also we're responsible for the CLM. So, for example, and this is kind of a breaking news here for your listeners.
Great.
I just had a conversation this morning with our Bishop Carolyn Moore, and she is going to be coming in on February the 15th. That's a Saturday. And she's actually going to be doing a supply pastor training and CLM training for either folks that are in the certified lay ministry, and also those that are supply pastors to help them get sacramental rights or sacramental abilities extended to them through their presiding elder. So it's a training course that she's doing for those that are serving as supply pastors, and also a worship training class for those that are in CLM, so the certified lay ministry. So it's kind of a cool thing that she's coming in to teach that, and she'll be helping folks to gain some ministry experience. And learn what they're going to do. And so that's what some of the things we do. We do trainings like that. The Board of Ministry is responsible for the oversight of all of the organized official ministry of the conference. So our folks that are supply pastors, our folks that are in candidacy, which is their exploring ordination, our folks that are deacons and elders, and making sure those interviews are taken properly. We're also responsible for vetting those that come in from other denominations and making sure there are certain requirements that they have to fulfill, as well as our lay people who are maybe don't feel a call to ordain ministry, but want to serve as a certified lay minister and perhaps preach, be a pulpit supply on the weekends when a pastor needs a vacation, which we all probably need from time to time.
Sure.
Or to just to serve in a more, educated or more involved role in their local church. And so the certified lay ministry course is a great way to do that as well. That's
awesome.
Just a general overview there, but I know we've got probably some more things to talk about.
Yeah, no, that's great. So your role is executive director. So what exactly, what does an executive director do?
Well, so part of executive director is what we call it. I guess chair of the Board of Ministry is also, some conferences use that term.
Okay.
I'm basically responsible for everything that the board does. So I'm the chair of the board. So I convene our meetings. I oversee the different teams that we have that are working on projects such as this supply pastor training event that I just mentioned. Also, making sure that whenever we are wanting to appoint somebody somewhere, especially if they come from outside of our conference, or make sure they are in the process that we're doing things in the proper way, kind of checking the discipline, making sure that we're kind of crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. One of the things I do as executive director is that I sit on the cabinet. I'm part of the cabinet. I'm the only, other than, Alan Beasley's our conference superintendent. He and I are the only two that are not presiding elders. Mm-hmm. And so whenever we're having conversations about potential folks to serve in churches, making sure that we've kind of supplied that and let them know about new possibilities, new folks that have been approved by the board, and so when they're looking at appointing somebody somewhere, they know their options, and also recruiting new people to come into ministry, working with our seminaries and our churches even. We do work with those that are considering a call to ministry, whether they're in the local church or maybe perhaps they're even in seminary or graduate school and they're looking at that. So we want to work with our young people and make sure they're considering opportunities for ordained ministry. Of course, there's a seminary path, but there's also a course of study, and those are options. And so sometimes we have folks that, as a second career, want to consider a call to ministry, and sometimes the course of study is a path for them. And so we help them make decisions. We help evaluate those that have answered the call and help walk them through the process and give them encouragement and find ways to maybe even find them money so they can afford to go to school. And there's a lot of great things going on there in our conference. And we kind of any area of ministry where people feel a call to do a ministry in a kind of organized or official level, we're kind of supervise that. And my role as executive director is just to make sure that the wheels keep turning, that things are I'm kind of the final check on making sure things happen, and meeting with folks as they are coming in. So
yeah. Okay, great. No, that's a great explanation, and it helps. I think that's helpful. Even maybe especially as you pointed out, there's a little bit of a difference in the way the model was set up under our old denomination than the new. So that's very helpful. Thank you for that. One of the things that I have been hearing a lot, and I've heard Alan say this, Alan Beasley, our conference superintendent, say this. Is that there needs to be more young people answering the call to ministry. And that's not that's not restricted to just here to North Alabama, but really all over. Can you talk a little bit about that, about why there is this need for more young people to answer the call to ministry?
Well, and I don't have the exact fact and figures in front of me, but I know that before 5 or 10 years ago, when we were looking at this, we were seeing that there were a lot more folks that were retiring out of ministry than were going into ministry. For example, I think the last year I was in the Methodist church, we had something like 30 retire and only like 5 be newly ordained. And so
That's not sustainable.
no, it's not sustainable at all. And the predominant number of people, even that are going into ministry, tend to be second career folks, which is great. We're great that anybody wants to be called into ministry, but we just see a declining number of young persons considering ministry as a career. Here's the thing: it's a calling,
Right.
and it's not something you go into for the money.
Right, for sure, for sure.
And it is a stressful job. There are other jobs that you could choose that are less stressful on your family, on your time. So it's not for everybody, and we're quick to recognize that. But one of the things that's been on my heart, this probably even when I was in youth ministry, this was something that I really push with my students is I want to have nurture a culture of call within our churches where we have our best and our brightest and those that love the Lord, and that we have a conversation with them. Hey, have you prayed about being called to ministry? Do you feel like God might be calling you to some form of whether part-time or full-time vocational ministry? Because we need the next generation of folks to come up and consider that. We have a huge need, and I believe that one of the barriers that we faced was some of our denominational kind of turmoil, and I think that barrier has been removed, but we still got to encourage our churches. I hope every pastor or layperson that's listening here will think about the young people in their church that are gifted and called, and pull them aside and say, hey, you have some gifts and graces. What are you planning to do with your life? What are you planning to do when you graduate high school? And is ministry something that you might want to prayerfully consider? And because that's what happened for me. That was how the conversation happened. Was somebody pulled me aside at annual conference and said, look, you've got some leadership. Have you thought about ordained ministry? And at the time I told them no, I wanted to be a tax attorney. That's what I was going to school to do. And they but that planted a seed in my mind that took time to germinate, but over the years it that kind of began to blossom and grew.
Yeah. I think in my own experience, sometimes it's not always immediately obvious to an individual that maybe they do have some gifts and graces. And so sometimes it does help to say, hey, have you considered this? Have you looked at this? Do you see this in yourself? And sometimes that does plant a seed, or maybe open some eyes to a different way of going, about things. So one of the things that I was thinking about and really wanted to pick your brain on a little is how do we in the local church, how do we do a better job? Is it just being more intentional, or do you think there's some specific things we need to be doing to help raise up young people to answer the call?
I think it's both. I think there are some. I think being more attentive, I think is part of it. I think offering the opportunity. I think in sermons, in conversations, mentioning it, like, hey, if you're called to ministry, there are opportunities. I mean, I know when I was in student ministry, I used to talk a lot to my students about you need to do what God's calling you to do. And if God's calling you to be a dentist, then be the best dentist you can be.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps there's a ministry opportunity. And even if you're going to be a dentist or a doctor, find a local church and serve, because there's always a church that's wanting you to serve. And so I used to talk, especially with my seniors, juniors and seniors, about those kind of conversations. I think finding ways for young people to be in ministry. Whether that's having them help run sound, having them do the announcements. I mean, listen, you want to have some fun, have a seventh grader do the announcements for your church a couple seconds.
Sure.
I mean, and that's a lot of fun. And the just find ways to encourage them. Maybe have them teach, read scripture. Maybe even if they feel they're gifted, invite them to preach. Now, you can't just say, hey, you're going to preach on this Sunday and drop the ball. You've got to walk alongside them and coach them and give them some resources but I think giving them some possibilities of ways they can serve. And I'll say this, I think it's important that we make sure that they see, folks that they can relate to. And I'll say this, one of the biggest challenges we've had is, we don't have a lot of women in ministry because we've lived in a culture that said that women can't serve, and so one of the things I've intentionally tried to do is make sure that my young ladies in the church see females lead, and that's important.
Yes.
And see that there are a lot of opportunities, and so there's that as well. But I also think that just find that student, that young person that's gifted, and encourage them and nurture them. And even after they go to college, sometimes we start off, and again, I started off in accounting, and there's nobody from my high school that wouldn't have said, oh, Toby's going to be, a great accountant, and that's his gifting, and, numbers and money and business was kind of my area. But the Lord took him a couple of years to kind of get a hold of me, but he did. And in that time, I answered the call, and I've been able to use those business and accounting skills in many ways in the local church. But, we just kind of keep encouraging. I think college is maybe the time they need the encouragement the most, is finding ways to reach out to them and make sure they're nurtured well.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and such an important thing. And I think too, every Christian is called to ministry. Not every Christian is called to pastoral ministry. Not every Christian is called to ordained ministry. And you highlighted this already, that our board of ministry encompasses both lay ministry and ordained ministry. And within those who are feeling a call, there is going to be a subset that God is going to raise up as our next ordained leaders. And so I think nurturing that is so vital. I wonder what you think about this. I used to hear this a lot, and we have opened some pathways within the GMC that I'm encouraged by. But one of the biggest things that I kept hearing was there is such an educational level barrier and such a cost barrier to pursuing ministry within the Methodist Church that it became really prohibitive for some. And I wonder if you have heard that, and can you talk some about some of these alternative pathways that might be available?
Sure. So I think that was, honestly, where I was, as I mentioned in my call story, I came out of undergrad. I had some debt, but I had a degree, and so there wasn't an urgency for me to pursue a master's degree at the time. But every time I looked at pursuing a master's degree, it meant leaving my church, moving to Wilmore or Durham or Atlanta, and spending 3 years not making any money and spending a ton on education. And that didn't seem like a good pathway for me.
Sure.
Because of the increase in technology, honestly, one of the benefits we had out of COVID, one of the few benefits we had out of COVID, was this understanding that perhaps our old educational models don't serve us anymore, or don't have to serve us anymore. Yeah. We've gotten a lot more creative with the way that we can do training and seminary and educational opportunities for those that are considering ministry. There's several schools that are offering mostly online or all online opportunities, or opportunities that are where you go for a week of classes and then you come back and do most of the work at home. So you could, in theory, serve a church while you're going to seminary, and kind of working through some of that. There is also the course of study, which is for those that I'll say this, and I'm pretty open about this. If you're a young person, if you're 25 to 45 and you're considering ministry, go ahead and go to seminary. I think it's going to serve you better over the long run. I think that's the more helpful path. But at the same time, we have some that are need to be bivocational, and they don't have the money or the time to do the seminary route. And so the course of study is an opportunity to take a seminary level course. It's not counted for credit in the same way, and the cost is a little cheaper, but it provides you with some of the same training. And depending on the seminary you go to, sometimes you can turn and convert that into a seminary level class later on. And so there is the traditional seminary route that can be done in person or online. There's the course of study, which is it's 20 classes that is required for those. It's 10 for deacon and then 10 for elder that are required, and you can take those over a number of years. And I think most of our seminaries, our global Methodist seminaries, either have course of study opportunities or are about to finish developing those. And so those are coming online, and those are great options. But the other wonderful thing that we've done is that our conference, for those who are taking course of study, we have worked to provide half of the cost for those.
So good.
Yes. So if you're thinking, hey, I want to do course of study, we're providing half the cost for that because we don't want to make we do not want to make that a barrier. Yeah. And then Dr. Matt O'Reilly, who is the senior pastor at Christ Church in Birmingham, and he also works with the faculty at Wesley Biblical Seminary and Beeson, which is at Sanford in Birmingham. He has worked with some other individuals in our conference and created the Global Methodist Foundation of North Alabama. Make sure you put Global Methodist Foundation of North Alabama, which is a scholarship foundation to help scholarship seminary students from our conference, and they are working to build that up. And the future goal is to make it so that if a young person, or really any age person, wants to go to seminary from our conference, that we can meet most, if not all, that need from a financial basis, so that finances don't become the barrier. And like I said earlier, with the kind of remote options, the timing kind of helps it. Now, you still got to read, you still got to write papers, you still got to do the work, but
sure,
we've taken some of the barriers away.
Yeah, that's so good. I think you're spot on about the sort of the remote thing, and I did a lot of that going through seminary myself. Asbury has a really strong background in that. That's where I did my seminary, and just kind of removing some of those barriers really, I think really helps out. Because like you said earlier, you don't really go into pastoral ministry for the money. And if you're talking about having to go into massive debt right out of the gate, that's not as attractive, even if you feel like that's what maybe God's calling you to. So it's so good. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things I forget the exact numbers, but I want to say that the average cost of going to seminary, by the time you count books and everything else, is like $60,000 to $80,000 a year for 1 year of schooling and all the other expenses. And the starting salary for somebody going into ministry is about $35,000 to $40,000, and that doesn't connect. There's no way that's not sustainable.
Yeah, I have an undergraduate degree in accounting too, and I can tell you that is not good numbers. Those are not good numbers. So no. Yeah, very, very good. Okay. Well, one last question, and we'll move on from that. But I just, if somebody came to you, Toby, and said, you know what, I really feel like God is calling me into pastoral ministry. What do I need to do? How would you steer them?
So one of the first things we do when somebody's called to ministry is we have them meet with their presiding elder, and that's a good place to start. And that's somebody they let know that, hey, I'm exploring this call. We have a number of resources. One of them actually comes from Asbury. It's kind of an exploring video series, and we have them meet with a mentor. So we have a mentor we have them meet with, and part of the job of the mentor is to help them kind of walk through the process. We do run a background check on everybody that it's thinking about ministry. That's just a precaution. Sure. and an important piece that we have. But then we have them meet with a mentor on a regular basis, and there's also a 6-month kind of internship. So there's several things we have in place that kind of lets a person kind of explore the possibilities and pray about it, talk to some trusted folks, and hear the opportunities without having to kind of sign on the dotted line, if you will. And so if somebody's called the ministry, one of the first things I'd want to do is find them somebody to meet with on a regular basis so that they could begin hearing about what ministry is about. Because sometimes what we perceive from the outside that ministry is about is not always what it looks like on the day-to-day, and you know that as well as I do.
Sure.
But for some that can be life-giving, and some people will look at that and say, man, this is not what I thought it was going to be, and maybe I need to find another way to serve in the church. But we want to help people with that. But we try to give them the options. We try to make sure that they are well informed. We give them both things to read and consider, but also people to meet with to ask them some probing questions that help them kind of prayerfully discern where they're at. And so that's what I do. Connect them with Robert Lancaster is our conference registrar, and he can get them kind of in the pipeline. And once he kind of gets a hold of a name and somebody's submitted an application, we can kind of begin working them through the process and making sure that they're getting the resources they need and encouragement along the way as they begin that process.
That's awesome. That's really good. And I know, and it is somewhat of a process, but that's a good thing, because you really offer them the chance to really explore where they're being called, and then it's not a hasty decision. The last thing you want to do is have somebody 2 years into seminary say, "What have I gotten myself into?" We don't want to do that. So it's good that there are some timelines there that have to be worked through, I think.
Yes, and it's helpful for them. And we have tried to find the balance between streamlining the process. One of the things that we recognized, again, lessons we learned from previous experiences was that at times getting plugged into ministry could be just too difficult and too long of a process, and it scared some people off. But we also don't want to make it, like you said, too easy, where that there's no processing, there's no deliberation, there's no discernment happening. So we tried to find a balance, and we think we found a way. And one of those is that internship, because that allows a person to get directly plugged into ministry from day one, but not in a committed way or in a way that puts them in a place where they're unsafe, or where they're going to find a place where they're not supported and encouraged.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Okay, well, let's shift gears one more time here, because another role that you recently had was as a delegate to the convening conference of the Global Methodist Church, which was held down in Costa Rica back in September. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your role as a delegate, what your role was there at conference, and what that was like.
Yeah, so I was part of our delegation, elected part of our delegation by our clergy, and I'm thankful for that honor that the clergy of our conference would trust me enough to allow me to go and represent us. One of my primary role was as a delegate, and each of us, each person is assigned to a subcommittee, and so I was on the ministry and local church subcommittee, which primarily dealt with a lot of the paragraphs in the Book of Doctrine and Disciplines that we in the Board of Ministry deal with, and that was kind of strategic. Since that was kind of my area of expertise and my area of functionality, I had not yet assumed that role yet, but we knew that I would be moving into that role, and so they made sure that they wanted to have that as my first choice to get assigned to. And so we worked on a lot of the paragraphs, a lot of the conversations. There were about 9 or 10 other boards of ministry chair that were there serving as delegates, and so we were able to kind of meet and have conversations about what was working. Because for those of us on the boards of ministry, we've been living into what was then the transitional book of doctrines and disciplines, and we knew what was working, what was not, what maybe needed to be tweaked. And so we began to work on that process to kind of look at the legislation that had been proposed and kind of shape it and perfect it. Perfection is the language we like to use. It's a good Wesleyan word.
Sure.
So we began to perfect the some of the pieces and to bring them forward before the full body to vote on, and so that was primarily my role. I also kind of served on our delegation as kind of the I was named as the parliamentarian mainly because I'm the nerdy guy that's going to read the discipline from cover to cover and make sure that everything is there and check the boxes and so they kind of put me in that role because when we were looking at legislation, they needed somebody, or when they wanted to propose something, to make sure it was done in that way. I don't have any specific parliamentary training, but I understand it well enough to be able to function within that system. So yeah, that's primarily what I did. Costa Rica was such an amazing experience. To be there when something is, I mean, even though we had been moving in that direction and we had been a denomination for a couple of years, to watch something really kind of be birthed and renewed there was just beautiful. To watch the Holy Spirit move, to watch people come together and have conversations about wanting to improve. And even though we might disagree, we were all going in the same direction. We might disagree on the best way to get there, but we were all going in the same direction. And there was really great conversation. Even the things we disagreed on, we made decisions, and then we moved forward and all trusting each other that we were all on the same page. And the worship was wonderful. The spirit was wonderful. Just to be able to be there as a part of that was that was a life-changing experience and one I'll never forget.
Yeah. It was a historic event. I was back home watching it online, or as much of it as I could, and I think one of the things that I took away from it, and you can comment on this as well, but one of the things, even just watching it online, is it just seemed it seemed spirit-led from the get-go, but it seemed so joyful. The whole thing just seemed, and I know there were discussions and there were deep conversations that took place that we didn't always see, but there was still such a sense of joy and of hope, and it just looked different than I think what so many of us were used to. And I'll let you comment on that.
No, it really was. I mean, there was, and for some, there were tears of joy, like, hey, we were waiting for this moment. I mean, I know one of our delegates from our conference, told us, they said, this is what I prayed for the last 30 years. This is what this is the Methodist church I always wanted, and I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. And wow. There was just a joy of being there. And like I said, every conversation we had was like, it was collaborative. It was like, hey, how do we work together? How do we figure this out? What are we trying to get to? And it was always, what's the best possible way and what works for the most people. And it was just an opportunity there was opportunities for healing. There was opportunities for celebration. There was a sense of just a sense of excitement. I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that came out of that. So this is the crazy stuff that happens in legislation. So we were working on and I was not on the subcommittee, but we were working on the requirements for those that are going to be in ordained ministry, and the group was having the subgroup that was working on that was having discussion about the 20 classes they were going to require. And one of the things that was not on the radar of any of the proposed legislation, any of the legislation that had come out before, it wasn't in the transitional book of doctrine and disciplines. But one of the requirements that's now in our formal is a book on the theology of the Holy Spirit, and really kind of encouraging a spirit-led movement within our churches, and making that a requirement even for those that are going to be ordained deacons. I believe it's in the deacon section, and so just wanting to have an emphasis on, and that was, I think, was a Holy Spirit moment that kind of got into a committee structure, which you'd never think. Just like, awesome. Hey, we want more of our leaders, more of our pastors to have experience and training and ability to lead our congregation the way we've seen our congregations in the way that we've seen it happen here at this conference, where the Holy Spirit is moving, where because if we're going to endure as a denomination and God is going to continue to use us, it's got to be fueled by the Holy Spirit. And so how can we help our leaders tap into that? And that was, like I said, that was not it on our agenda or on anybody's radar that I know of, but it just kind of happened in the midst of conversations.
Wow, that's awesome. Oh, yeah. I love that. That's great. Well, all right. Well, we're kind of getting close to the end of our time together here. Got a couple more questions I want to throw your way. First, just kind of on a personal level, what challenges do you see and what excites you about this new movement called the Global Methodist Church?
So I think, and to kind of segue from our last conversation, I think there are, we had a convening general conference. There were some paragraphs that were open to amendment. There were some that we weren't allowed to. They kind of asked us to keep closed because we were only there for a week and we had a lot of work to do. Right. I think there are still some things that we need to adjust, and I think we have some more work to do, and hopefully that work's going to happen in 26. And so as we begin to grow, thinking about what is working in the interim, what's working and what's not, and what we need to pieces. And so I think that's part of it. But at the same time, I think one of the challenges we face is not becoming too institutional. We don't want to, there are things we need and things, that the doctrines and disciplines help us to accomplish, but we don't want to become so institutionalized, because I think that can lead to, to not having growth and to not having, and to be so hampered by what, the doctrines and discipline says. So we want to have a balance there. And so I think that's a challenge. But what excites me is that we are seeing growth in new parts of the world where Methodism, I think there's going to be in some areas where, like China, there's some possibilities there in some of the countries where maybe Christianity is not as welcome, that there's a movement to reach those places. And I'm already hearing kind of whispers of areas where we're growing, where there hasn't been a strong Methodist presence. And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited that there's a focus more on the local church, and the local church being the grassroots kind of primary place for things to happen. I'm excited that we're beginning to have really great worship, that we have the freedom to be able to, we're able to freely talk about words like being saved, being born again, and evangelism and outreach without having to kind of add an apology or an asterisk or something else. We can just say, here's what we're about. And I'm excited about our mission statement. Spreading scriptural holiness, I think is a beautiful thing as we learn to grow in sanctification. I think it helps us to focus on, discipleship, which is at the heart of what I do, and what I love is helping people to grow as disciples of Jesus Christ. And so I'm excited that we've embraced our Wesleyan heritage, but that we've not embraced some of the institutional baggage that we hopefully left behind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I've got to say, one of my favorite things that came out of General Conference, out of the convening conference, is our new mission statement. There's nothing wrong with our old mission statement. It was fine, but the fact that it is really leaning into the Wesleyan distinctive of spreading scriptural holiness, of entire sanctification, of that really resonates with me, and I'm so appreciative of. I know Dr. David Watson was really involved in that. I know Paul Lawler was really involved in that, and several others were. But that was I loved to see what was coming out of that, and I love that we are putting such an emphasis on that. Both biblically and true to our Wesleyan roots. I'm thankful for that. All right, so one last question for you, and this one may kind of come out of left field, but it's a question, and I asked Alan this when I had a conversation with him recently, and so I'll put it to you. I wonder if you have a favorite hymn or a worship song, or maybe not a favorite, but one that is really speaking into your life right now.
Right now, "The Goodness of God" is a hymn that I cannot hear without crying. I mean. They played it a couple times at conference, and I just lost it. Through this really strange point in my journey with some of the stuff that happened to me in 19, and then all of the denominational craziness in the midst of COVID, and then post-COVID, and all that. I've just seen God be so faithful, and it still. It still humbles me to think of how faithful He's been, even in the midst of the craziness that has been my life and so many of our other lives. And so for me, "The Goodness of God" is one of those that, like I said, I can't hardly sing it. I told my worship band here, I said, look, if y'all are going to play that, y'all got to give me a heads up, because I got to know ahead of time, and don't do it right before I get up to preach, because I will lose it. And so anyway, so that's one that's really spoken to me. But I will say this as well. We received at General Conference, we received the special edition. It's full of Wesley's hymns, and man, there's some great theology and some hymns I had not seen in print before that are just beautiful hymns and songs. And so if you get a copy of that, I think it's on the seedbed. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's the commemorative hymnal that was given out to us. So it's a beautiful hymnal as well.
Yeah, I have jokingly said before, as good as John Wesley was, Charles Wesley kind of did the same thing, but he went a step further and put his to music. So,
hey, I had a professor in seminary, my worship professor, and he was a big Charles Wesley apologist, and he said, "Man, John Wesley gets too much credit. It's really John that did all the work."
All right. Well, we have come to the end of our time together. Toby, what a great conversation. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with us today on the Heart and Life podcast. What a pleasure to hear from you and learn from you. And I'm so appreciative of your ministry out in Russellville and on our board, and just all the good work that you're doing for our conference. And so thank you so much for that. God bless you, man. I thank you for what you're doing for the kingdom of God.
I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for having me on, and look forward to hearing more of these. I'm excited to have some of these to listen to. So I know the first one launches pretty soon, right?
Yeah. Well, as we record this, it should be launching tomorrow. It should be dropping. Tomorrow as
awesome.
as we record this today. So yeah, looking forward to some great conversations. There's so much, so many people doing incredible ministry across North Alabama, and we're looking forward to some great conversations. And friends, let me offer this word of encouragement as we wrap up our time together. If you believe that God may be calling you into ministry, start praying now. Start talking to the people who know you the best. Start talking to your pastor, and just see where God might be leading you. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode, Toby. We give a special thanks to you once again. God bless you guys, and may you live into all that God has for you seeking to live a life of holiness in all that you do, both in your heart and in your life. Well, that's about all the time we have today on the Heart and Life podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation, but even more, we hope that something in it brought you hope, inspiration, or maybe taught you something new. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, follow, subscribe, and share our podcast on your podcast platform of choice. Music for today's episode is Genoa by 50 Sounds.